Nearly 90% of COVID relief funds allotted to school districts still unspent. That stunning headline tops a recent John Locke Foundation research brief from Dr. Robert Luebke. He is Senior Fellow at the Center for Effective Education. That is a stunning number. We've had all of this money come in for COVID relief in North Carolina. 9 out of $10 still unspent.
Yeah, that is a stunning headline, Mitch. And I think most people, when they see that, their eyebrows go up, as they should, because everyone knows COVID has dominated the headlines for the last year and a half. And there have been 3 major bills that have pushed out federal money. North Carolina has gotten about $6 billion to help address the COVID relief pandemic.
Do you think that number, the $6 billion, is something that gets lost in the shuffle because there were the 3 different bills and they were small pieces of much larger relief bills, but when you add it all up, it is this big, massive $6 billion number?
You're right, Mitch. I think it does get lost, and I think that's kind of a dangerous thing because we lose touch at how large this sum is. And the money was initially pushed out, as a means to address an emergency, which everybody believed it was. But then as time went on and we saw the economy rebound, people started going back to work, et cetera. We found out that, the economic losses might not be as deep and as significant and as broad as we thought. Things started to improve, but yet all the federal aid still kept coming. And by and large, the largest piece, the American Relief Plan, which President Biden signed in January of this year, dwarfs the previous 2 packages by billions.
And you mentioned in this research brief that there was initial concern about what COVID would do and how it would affect the schools, but these packages were really passed as the economy was improving, especially that last largest one.
Yeah, that's another thing that shouldn't get lost here is that the money kept coming at a time where the economy was improving and the need, according to many, was not as deep as people originally thought, but the money kept coming.
You have, and we're not going to get into all the details, but you have within this brief an interesting table that talks about the largest school systems, the allotment that they've gotten because of the COVID money, and how much it amounts to per student. And I'm just going to throw out a couple of numbers. Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools, something like $3,600 per student. Wake County schools, $2,300 per student. Guilford County schools, $4,600 per student. One county on this list, the Robeson County school system, $7,800 per student. Compared to what the students normally get per student allotment, that's a big chunk. We're talking about sometimes 30, 40, 50% or more of what they already get normally.
That's right, Mitch. It's in addition to about the $9,900 that the average North Carolina public school student gets. Now, COVID money, I'm not going to get into the complexity of the formula, but it was distributed primarily or very close to how Title I dollars were distributed, which means if you have more Title I students, poor and disadvantaged kids, you'll get more money. So it's not an equitable distribution. It's distributed. The monies are distributed by need. So you get disparities from county to county, but it's a lot of money, and on average, it's about an additional $3,900 per student if you take all of that money. Now, some of that will be distributed over like 2 or 3 years, but the point is it's still all going to students, or should be going to students.
Back to what we talked about at the very beginning, only 10% of all of this money has been spent to this point, and one of the points of your brief is that you contacted the State Department of Public Instruction and asked, why might this be? What would account for the fact that only 1 out of the $10 appropriated so far has been spent?
Well, I think the response that included in the article was a bit evasive. I mean, they talked about some of the general points about what the money could possibly be used for and so forth. But I think it was an indicative of largely a wait and see attitude that most of the school districts across North Carolina are taking. Now, what's really important with that is this money was distributed on the assumption that this was an emergency, a pandemic. There were specific needs and so forth. But as you can see now, we're distributing money. A lot of this money can be actually distributed up until expended until December of 2024.
And one of the points that you make after talking about this is that this really shows a strong need for accountability and transparency. There's all of this money out there, and we need to know what it's being used for.
That's right. That's really critical at this point right now, Mitch. During this time, up until about the end of August or the beginning of September, most school districts in North Carolina, as well as across the country, are trying to develop plans as to how to spend some of this money. Now, what's interesting about ARPA, which is the legislation that will distribute, the $3.6 billion in North Carolina.
This was the one that Biden signed into
Yes, President Biden signed the $1.9 trillion, $3.6 billion of which comes to North Carolina for K-12 schools. What's interesting about that is, when it's spent, 20% of it has to be earmarked for learning loss, but the other 80%, which will go, which also goes to school districts, they have to work with communities, with parents on how to develop a good plan, to aid students. This is somewhat different in that a large amount of this funding already is being pushed down to school districts, which in the past is usually distributed to the State Department of Education. That's novel. We think that's good, but it places a primacy on transparency. It places a primacy on accountability. It also places really a high importance on communities and parents giving their input into how this money should be spent.
Well, you could learn much more by going to the John Locke Foundation's website and finding the research brief. Once again, the headline, I think it'll raise your eyebrows. Nearly 90% of COVID relief funds allotted to school districts still unspent. Its author is Dr. Robert Luebke. He is Senior Fellow at the Center for Effective Education at the John Locke Foundation. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Mitch.